All right, well, I think we'll get started. I'm Trevor Cameron, our general manager here at Sunnyside. Thanks for joining us for tucking in the garden for the winter, putting the garden to bed, getting ahead for spring projects. This class could have many names. So welcome, thanks for joining us. Say hi to Nicole, she's in the back with the pretty picture behind her on the green screen. Isn't that nice?
Hi, good morning.
So thanks again for joining us. We'll go through some things today and leave plenty of time for questions at the end. Hopefully everybody had a chance to grab the handout. It's available on the website. You should have got a link to it with the class email. Certainly let us know if you can't find it or didn't get it. We can send you a copy, but this will be a good little reference you can use to kind of do a little bit of a fall checklist work. So you know, I kind of would think of this class a little bit for me as getting ahead for spring. You know, nobody's going to want to disappear for the winter and come out in April and see their yard covered in debris and leaves and old foliage and weeds everywhere, you know, on and on. We want to get a little bit of that work done here in the fall. Weather's cool. You know, it's not too bad if we pick a day that's not so rainy. We can get some of these things checked off the list here and enjoy a little bit of spring when we get to that point. This class, I want to start by saying it's not about going out today, tomorrow, next week. You know, nobody knows what the weather is going to do here in the Pacific Northwest, but you know, my yard still looks great. I'm in fall color. I've got flowers out. Perennials are still blooming. I'm not going to run home and do this afternoon. When I get home, I'm going to find a different project to work on because I want to enjoy the last of fall. I mean, this may be 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Kind of think of this as things that you can watch for and try to accomplish here, you know, over the coming weeks as we get into fall towards winter. And as we get colder weather at night, you know, first frost will always kind of be the great equalizer. We'll have time to start really doing some cleanup after we go dormant and get that first frost here, which I hope is not for a little while still. You know, to me, if one way you can think of this, and this is the one I struggle with myself, is trying to find the balance between neat and natural. I mean, Mother Nature gives us leaves, compost, debris. You know, we can go on and on of things that collect in the soil to help rejuvenate it for spring. But if you're kind of a neat freak like me, I have a tough time walking away from the yard and leaving 4 inches of leaves everywhere and this and that and the rest. It is great soil protection. I'm not saying run home and clean it all up, but I try to do certain areas maybe that are a little more visible, and certainly some plants that maybe are a little more prone to slugs, or if I leave debris down there, that I might have issues down the road. Or perhaps I had a disease on my rose bush, for example, this year. I don't want to leave those diseased leaves festering on the soil. I want to clean that portion of it up so that I can start fresh next year. So maybe think of it this way: if you're a freak like I am, and whatever I do clean up, I immediately get compost, rejuvenate that soil, protect the soil surface, and I'm good to go for spring, you know, down the road. If you know, leave it al natural, no worries. You know, you can do this same thing coming out of winter. Perhaps some of those leaves will degrade and turn into mulch, or we can cover up with a layer of compost come springtime and be ready to rock for 2021. So if we look at that outline, we'll kind of go through a few things that hopefully will get you thinking about here for fall. You know, the first thing always is kind of discussion about how our gardens harden off as we get colder and colder here at night. We had the first kind of low 40s. I think the high 30s is coming. Certainly colors everywhere. We're seeing things start to get towards dormancy for the fall. Not quite yet, but we want to let these things gradually go dormant naturally. I don't want to run out right now and cut off plants that are still actively growing. I want to let them tell me as a gardener, I'm done for the year. Go ahead and chop me off of the ground and I'll see you again, you know, next spring kind of thing. I don't want to rush that on. Sap is still flowing in wood. You know, we don't want to do a lot of major pruning right now. We want to let things kind of lock down for winter and then have at some of those projects here after we get our frost, okay? You know, just so everybody knows, you know, we are officially, according to the world, zone 8. I would be more comfortable telling you you're zone 7. Zone 8, sometimes we take a little chance of some plants in the winter. But at zone 7, we're looking at that 0 to 10 degrees above 0. I don't think we're ever going to get that cold. But if we do get down into the teens, You know, that leaves you a little extra protection. Zone 8, you know, we'll start to get some damage when we get down into the low 20s and high teens during the winter months. So be careful that as you look at your landscape and wonder, what should I bring in? What should I protect? What do I need to worry about in pots? You know, those kinds of choices. Certainly ask after class. We can go through some of your specifics as well. A couple things you see there, I said getting ahead for spring. Slugs is a huge one around us in the Northwest. We've got a lot of shade, we've got a lot of rain, we've got a lot of moisture, we never get that cold. So if I'm a little sluggy creature, I'm going to find some nice debris to lay my eggs underneath, and I'm going to hang out by plants that I like to eat. We go through every spring. I hear from a lot of customers, you know, I never saw my coneflower come up. What happened to my dahlia I left in the ground? If that slug's got a chance to lay eggs and overwinter, he's going to eat that foliage off as fast as it comes out of the ground. So those are the plants for me that I'm looking to remove the debris, put some fresh, clean compost around there, and then also perhaps lay a little slug bait. You know, it's not that bad time of the year where I can get something like sluggo. I don't have to get, you know, murder, death, kill, poison anymore. We haven't sold metal aldehydes here for years, but if we get something like sluggo, natural iron phosphate, this is people's pet, wildlife, doesn't hurt anything except for slugs and snails. So if I put this down, it's got a great attractant in it, and they will head for this iron phosphate. Off they crawl into the great beyond and die in peace. You won't have to look at the slimy trails by your front porch. The new version of that, just to mention, the Sluggo Max. I think people recognize that brand name Sluggo being the iron phosphate and being organic. Sluggo Max is no different except for it has an attractant in it that's 3 times more powerful. So I use a lot less for the same amount of area, and that slug will find it a little bit easier. So consider a little bit of slug control here this fall. If we talk about weeds, you know, we'll talk about, we did the lawn class here a few weeks ago. We would talk about maybe turf and the regular garden or driveway areas a little bit separately. But certainly if I leave weeds, you know, go ahead. We kind of chuckle, the popweed is coming, and it's here all winter, and every time it pops, you got 1,000 more. So if you wish to cover your landscape with popweed, then leave it alone and it will take over. But if we, you know, any weeds at all, we want to try to get a little bit of head start here. If we can clean it up in the fall, we're going to have all that less going to seed, and we'll have a clean yard come springtime. So on the lawn, we're still warm enough. If you want to go the natural route, I would try this Weed Beater FE. This does just about everything in turf that doesn't hurt grass, and this would take care of clover, anything really but clover and oxalis, but dandelion, spurge, all these other common things we get in our lawns. This would take care of it kind of the natural way. It's just iron, which is actually a great moss killer as well. So that will take care of mosses, lichens, algae, as well as some pretty common weeds in the turf without, again, hurting my lawn. If I'm going into the beds, planting beds, driveway, gravel, walkway, whatever else, something natural is the botanical cleanup from Bonide. This is a great mixture of natural organic type acids that will burn the weeds, typically get the root system. Either way, even if I torch the foliage and maybe it tries to come back next year, I can hit it a second time. I've eliminated it from going to seed. So I'm going to have the one I had before instead of 100 now after it's gone to seed here this fall. So this is a non-selective herbicide. I want to make sure that's clear with this. I'm not going to put this on my lawn or I'm going to burn my grass. And conversely, I have to be real careful not to get this on plants in my garden. If I'm spraying in and amongst shrubs and perennials and things, it won't hurt the soil at all, but I don't want to get this on the foliage of anything potentially that would burn a little bit as well, okay? So a great time to get weeds. If you're a little bit maybe old school like me, I do a little bit of spraying here and there, especially in the grass, but a lot of times I'm out just taking care of it manually. If you haven't got the hula hoe, this is the way to go. This is a really easy tool. I can drag along the soil surface a couple inches down and get almost any weed taken care of in my garden bed. So you got a little short-handled one and you got the long hula hoe. So that's a great tool if you don't have one to make life a little easier. Cutting back perennials, again, I'm not going to run home today and cut back my coneflowers, my black-eyed Susan, sneezeweed. I got all kinds of color still going in my own yard. But, 2-3 weeks from now, they'll be done for the winter. I want these perennials to go away, cut them back, get the debris out of my yard into the yard waste, and then I'll see you again next spring as they regrow. If you think of perennials, to me, there's 3 kind of ways to think about it. The first one, to simplify things, I call them stick perennials. If I take this coneflower here, I'm still blooming, so I'm not going to cut this off for plast. Hopefully someone will still buy it this fall. But this is a perennial that I would expect to have for years in my own garden. So I'm going to wait till this tells me it's dormant. The flower heads will dry, turn to seed. The birds may use some of that for a little food. But this is going to go brown, and I'm going to be left with hard, woody sticks where these flower stalks were. I can leave those. A lot of times in my yard, I'll clean up the debris, leave the sticks, because that'll mark for me or my 2 young boys, this is where you don't want to walk on. I don't want to damage the crown over the winter, but it marks the spot where I expect to see that coneflower come back next year. So for me, about a month, 6 weeks from now, I'll walk out. I will cut off the stalks a couple inches out of the soil, clean up all the old foliage. For me, I'll take a few handfuls of good EB Stone organic planting compost, and I will mulch that guy. Then next spring, I can scrape that mulch away, throw some rose and flower food down the first part of March, and cover that right back up with that same compost I put down, and off we go for another season. So sticks, one type of perennials that eventually you will want to cut back. It kind of sounds funny, but I call some of these mushers, and everybody who has lots of hosta knows what I mean. Not to sound gross, but what does that do here in a month or so? It kind of turns to slimy snot. As it melts to the soil, I can almost grab my gloves and just rake it up and throw it in the yard waste, or rake it up with my yard debris and we're done. Certain plants like this, yes, I would rather have you just clean this foliage up, make sure we don't have some of that natural mulch underneath it, again, to harbor slug eggs or other issues over the winter. I do the same thing. I cut my hosta back. Maybe I'll mulch the crown, protect the eyes or the crown of it a little bit with a couple inches of mulch. And then in springtime, I can just scrape that mulch away, apply my rim of good organic rose and flower food, cover it right back up with that mulch, and off we go for another season, okay? The last type, kind of as we get into fall, are evergreen perennials. Anyone who knows me here knows I have this disease we call heucheritis. I cannot have enough heucheras in my garden, so there's a dark purple one as an example. And hellebores, which we'll be having a class on here. I'll be teaching the first weekend in November on just hellebores, or sometimes we call them Christmas rose or Lenten rose. These are really nice perennials that keep their foliage all year. So I have no interest in the fall of chopping this whole thing off. I want the presence and the structure through early winter. The hellebore, I'll just tell you, you would want to walk out after Christmas. And my trick is I cut all the leaves off. I walk out after Christmas and take all the foliage down to the crown, because then I can see all the flowers as they start blooming in January, February, March. And I've eliminated all the old foliage, and I can start right over again come springtime. Heucheras, I just did all my 100 of them probably in the last 3-4 weeks at home. But all I'm interested in doing is going down to the base and either using my pruners or my fingers and pinching out just the old rim of foliage that's around the base. Then I get to look at the nice, fresh, attractive foliage color, excuse me, all through the winter. And then I'll do the same thing and check it coming out of winter. Maybe I have one rim of foliage to pinch out, and I've got all that fresh spring growth to make my heuchera look brand new again. So think of those perennials again, not today, but as we go here in the next coming weeks, watch the weather. Once those guys are going brown, yellow, and they're dormant, we can go ahead and start getting those cleaned up here for fall. Okay. Last one I put on there is kind of cleaning up debris and mulching. And like I mentioned, this is going to be more up to you as a gardener. Excuse me. Try to find your kind of happy medium. I'm a admitted OCD a little bit in my yard, so I like to look out and see clean compost and everything nice and tidy. So I fight my left brain with the right brain and say, what should I clean up? What should I leave? So I don't clean up at all because it's a benefit to leave some mulch. You know, we love hummingbirds here in the Northwest. You know, yes, you have your nectar feeder out that's going to keep that guy sugary happy all winter, but hummingbirds love protein. You know, if I don't have any insects that are foraging around my ground debris, the hummingbirds got no protein to make it through winter. The diet will swap to a little bit more protein and a little less carbohydrate or sugar over the winter. But if I can leave some pockets of debris where I want them to be, remove other pockets and mulch, then I'm going to, again, be a little bit ahead for come springtime, okay? I'll talk storing bulbs here real quick. I love dahlias. This goes back to my grandmother with me. My mother's got a lot of dahlias. We share some these days. I probably got 15, maybe 20 different ones in different spots in my yard. I'm pretty lucky that I know where I built these gardens and planted dahlias. Yes, I have sun, but the key is drainage. You know, I've got good drainage, so I don't have to worry about wintertime rot. Dahlias are usually okay up here, left in the soil for some people, but not others. If you want your dahlia back, absolutely for sure, you need to dig it and store it over the winter. You can email questions. We won't be digging any because mine are still blooming too. But there's a lot of different ways, different mediums. You can find some interesting techniques on the internet, I'm sure. But if you for sure want that dahlia back, you need to dig it here before we get the hard frost, cut the growth off, dry it, hang it, dry it, divide it, and then replant it coming out of winter. We would sell fresh dahlia bulbs for 2021 in that March, April time frame. That's when we would pop it right back in the soil. Once we get warm, up it comes again, and we have our dahlia going forward. If I could make one suggestion, you know, there's a few dahlias that I have that go back to my grandma, you know, and they're probably ones that I'm never going to be able to find again. Don't even have a name for them, but they're just ones that kind of mean a little bit more to me personally than others. So if I go buy a packaged one, you know, $5-6, and it comes back great. If it doesn't, I'll go try another one in my yard. But my, you know, the ones that mean something, I want to save. So there's a couple that I will at least dig part of the clump to make sure if it doesn't come back, we get a really wet winter, then I will always have that tuber to replace because I probably wouldn't be able to find that one again. So I use dahlias as an example. You know, that could be tuberous begonias, which have no chance living outside here in the winter. You would want to pull those for sure and store them in a number of different ways. Cannas is another example. I've left cannas out a couple times over the years and had them come back great. I've left them in the same spot in other winters and never saw them again. So that's another one. If you want to save it for sure, dig that massive bulb out, store that, and then replant it in 2021 as we get into mid-late spring, okay? Protecting the lawn is the next subject here. And we had a long class here back mid-September, but just in case you didn't, I would just touch on a couple things. Hopefully you fed it, done your moss control to kind of get the turf happy for winter. The more important thing for this class would be watching for turf disease. I've already seen samples and pictures from customers come in with red thread, brown patch. We can go on and on with different thatch type diseases. If you want to keep that to a minimum, because the rain is not going to go away in Western Washington here until we get into probably later next spring, we're going to stay moist. We've got the marine layer every day. The dew is heavy, it's wet. And if I'm a little fungus creature, I need wet turf to land on. So this blows around in the wind everywhere. If you have wet lawn, that spore lands, it has a chance to propagate, then I'm gonna have little patches of red thread. You walk on it, you start moving it around. You mow it, it's on your lawnmower blades, and we spread it through the turf area. I would consider perhaps treating, if you're worried about it or you've seen it, you can probably find some great pictures online. Look up red thread's the most common one I see around. Red thread, or some people call it pink thread. If we get a bag like Infuse, this is a fungus control for turf. I broadcast this out over my turf area. It soaks down into that thatch layer and removes those spores and should get me much, much cleaner. Yes, it's chemical. I'm not going to lie to you. But it's safe as long as you get it down and keep them off for the day. So if I can apply this, let it burn on the turf for 3-4 hours when it's dry, and then it can rain or you can wash it down into that thatch layer, I'm going to have great success. I've already heard back from a few people that were fighting red thread around the turf class here a month or so ago that have already came back and said, hey, I got a bag of that. It worked great. My lawn's back to perfect here going into winter. So if I don't watch for things like red thread or treat it, you're probably going to come out of winter with some browny, yellowy, dead patch areas that we'll have to do a little bit more work as far as overseeding, reseeding, and getting ready for the 2021 season, okay? Dormant spraying, again, we're not quite dormant yet. We'll talk a little bit more about dormant spraying when we get to the pruning class here coming up in a couple weeks. But just a heads up, there's a lot of things we can use to protect our plants. I would look at it this way. Most of you on this Zoom call or Zoom webinar, I'm assuming, care about your yard. Otherwise, you wouldn't be wasting your time listening to me pontificate about putting your garden to bed. So if you're into your yard, you've noticed things as we've gone through the season. My rose, it had black spot. My apple tree had scab on it this year. Whatever the disease issue or bug issue was, you kind of noted and hopefully made a mental note. I've got to watch that thing here. It had a problem this year, so I don't have that problem again in the next growing season. Those are the things that I'm worrying about dormant spraying. I'm not worrying about mixing up my two natural things. Horticultural oil is all organic. Liquid cop is a great natural type fungicide. I can mix these two together in the same sprayer and not do it twice. Disease, bugs, I've got everything covered. But I'm not going to go home and mix 30 gallons of this and cover my entire landscape. There's no need. What I'm going to try to convince you to do is look at those things that you had problems with this growing season and make sure at some point over the dormant winter here, December, January, February, we get those plants properly sprayed so that I can start 2021 clean, okay? So don't think of this and I've got to spray the whole yard. I'm not telling you to go home and do that. It's just one of those things that to get the plants that you had issues with, watch those first and foremost, okay? Those again are also the plants that I'll be looking at, making sure the foliage was cleaned up and doing everything I can naturally to eliminate the bug, the disease, anything going into the next gardening season. Fruits and berries, it's the same thing. Whether I had an issue or not, those are the plants in my own yard. I am always going to try to get rid of all of the debris. I do not want mummified apples. I don't want foliage on my peach tree. I don't want leaf debris underneath there. I want that cleaned up here for winter because that is where the diseases will fester. The scab, the peach leaf curl, we can go on and on. If you may have noticed you had them this year, you didn't. Even if you didn't, I wouldn't take a chance of having it back on my tree. So I'm absolutely cleaning up my edibles and getting all that debris out, including the mummified fruit. Sometimes you got to get a broom out and knock a couple apples that are rotting up in the branches and knock those to the ground and get them out of there. That's your maggot. You're going to have your maggot worms wintering in there and then right back again when they hatch into flies for 2021. So let's try to get the fruit and the berries especially cleaned out. When we talk about the cane berries like raspberries, brambles like blackberries, boysenberry, we can go on and on. We'll talk a little bit about that in the pruning class, but coming up this winter is when you want to thin your rows. So I, again, wouldn't run home and do it today or in the next couple of weeks, but after we go dormant, you can get some of that done over winter and open up all that air and that sun to have a healthier crop of berries going for 2021, okay? Overwintering the vegetable garden. If we look at the vegetable garden, I know for me, I had to take mine down because we had a backyard project, but I would still have carrots, beets, lettuce, spinach, all kinds of stuff going for my wife and my boys still. It's still cool season veggie time. I'm not saying to run home and empty out your bed. Sometimes you can get row cover and almost keep that going through the winter time or a good portion of it here in our gardens local in this area. We just want to make sure we have that soil prepped for 2021 at some point. Typically, the cool season crops are done here in the next month or so. I want to protect my soil for 2021. I don't want to leave all that sitting there with open soil to get a little bit depleted over the winter. I want to mulch it. I want to do something to keep it happy. Lime Lime is always a must for the vegetable garden. Let Mother Nature wash that in for you. Whether I do it now, a lot of times in the fall, and a lot of times I'll repeat this application in March before I plant my full season crops again. If I get something like good natural agricultural lime, that's going to sweeten my soil and bring the pH of that up a little bit. Calcium is a great equalizer for vegetable gardens. I want to have calcium A for good disease resistance in my plants, but vegetables really like a higher pH. Everything else does not. So if I have moss issues, whatever else, you're going to see that dissipate a little bit. As I add lime, my vegetable garden will be much happier. So look at something like lime application. And I would also maybe consider a cover crop. I brought a couple in here. I like the crimson clover myself. It's got a pretty flower, keeps the bees happy coming out of winter too. And we've also got buckwheat. We've got other types in there as well. I've seen lots of different cover crop options. But if I have bare soil and I've emptied out that vegetable garden or raised bed for the winter time, and I want to protect my soil surface and add nutrients, I could sprinkle out a cover crop like that here in the fall, let that germinate, create some nice low foliage, that I can go back in spring and turn that soil over and add all that nitrogen fixing and that nutrients back into my soil as I plant for 2020. So that might be something to consider if you haven't tried. I know my folks have a big vegetable garden. They will broadcast it over the entire thing, sometimes in a raised bed. It's very easy just to plant a little cover crop for the winter, then take that out come springtime, and off we go for another year of good vegetable garden. Okay. I mentioned the roses real briefly earlier. We used to kind of have a specific rose class in the fall, but we'll talk, I'll probably prune one at our pruning class just to kind of show you if you join us for the pruning class. But just kind of a heads up on roses. Again, I mentioned about the debris. I love roses. I have some in my own yard, and I'll have more here when I have more time and my kids are out the house. But roses are fabulous summer bloomers. You're just going to fight a little bit of disease here in the Pacific Northwest. So yes, I can spray. Yes, I feed regularly. None of that ever changes. But I want to start clean every year. And a lot of times with our weather cycle, the rose will not go dormant over the winter months. It wants to hang on to some foliage. Your naked eye looks at that rose in January. Oh, wow, I got some fresh green leaves on there. Looks like spring's coming. Is it the end of the world? No, but I would want all of that stripped off before we start 2021. I don't want any chance of that. What you're looking at looks green, has mildew, black spot, rust, whatever disease spores are on that foliage, then it's on for the whole season. I'm going to have a tough time getting rid of it. So I always mark Veterans Day, mid-November on my calendar, and that's when we want to cut roses back. If you think about hip high, hip high in the fall gets rid of all my old blossoms. It'll get rid of most of the foliage. It gets me to a comfortable height where I'm not going to have snow or wind or anything break my canes. So I leave it down for the fall, and then I'll walk out, kind of the President's Weekend, mid-February, and go down to maybe knee-high if I want them a little bit lower. Not climbers, but your typical bush roses. If you remember that, hip high in the fall, kind of knee-high come springtime, I'm going to have a much nicer, balanced, compact plant with all the flowers I want. We would never feed anything in the fall. We want things to harden off and go dormant. So I'm waiting on my fertilizer until I do my work in February, but it doesn't mean that I still can't do my first pruning, get some debris cleaned up, get it ready to go for wintertime, and off we go for spring 2021, okay? Transplanting and dividing, this is a question we get all year. When can I move this? When can I chop this? When can I divide that? I'm not saying you can at any point, but if you want to reach that near 100% success, the dormant season is when to transplant. If I've got to move a plant, my best chance is when it's not actively growing. I can relocate it, get some nice root stimulator on it, organic fertilizer like Sure Start, let that guy reestablish, and then boom, I'm ready to go as it breaks bud, and off we go for spring. I try to avoid all digging up except for emergency in the actual growing season. But in the wintertime, I can have at it. I can chop my hosta, divide it, move it around, give them to a friend. There's a lot of ways to kind of share plants. If I show you one thing, I found a few years ago, we sell a lot of these in the store now. This looks like a Conan the Barbarian weapon, if you can see that shovel. You know, I've got cuts on the side. I got a very sharp point. Do not land this on your toes, okay? You will not have a toe if you do that. But this is the easiest thing I've ever found to chop some simple roots and divide perennials. I step on this in the middle of a hosta clump, it's cleaved in half. I don't have to sit there for days with my trowel or my regular shovel. It's a very easy tool to chop grasses, perennials, as well as smaller shrubs, and actually cut those surface roots and get through without having to pull out 8 different tools to get a shrub moved. So this is a shovel called the Root Slayer. It's got a great name. This is the pointed one. We just got in the round point shovel style as well that has the same cut mark in that center that I can really do some damage as far as transplanting and dividing things, okay? So remember, you know, if you do choose to transplant and divide here, probably got a couple more weeks till things go dormant, but I'm still gonna treat it like I was putting in a new plant. I'm gonna get compost. I'm gonna get Sure Start organic fertilizer with the mycorrhizae. I'm gonna add a third compost, dig a nice hole, do all the prep work just like I was planting a new plant, and I'm gonna put a little rim of that Sure Start on there because we do get some good root development here in the fall, and you'll be ready to rock come springtime when it wakes back up again, okay? On that note, you know, follow us for planting in general. You know, if you've got areas you've been holding off on planting, this is a great time of year to come down. We got lots of good sales going. There's still a lot of good plants to put in, but I can do a very easy transplanting here or planting new plants in the fall, and that puts me 6 months ahead for 2021. I'll get root growth, won't have to worry as much about water next year. I would especially look at the slopes and the back corners of your yard, places you can't get the hose to quite as easy. If I get those areas done in the fall, I'm gonna have that rooting development happen, and I won't have to worry as much about the irrigation part of it come summer 2021, okay? I mentioned pruning, and we're gonna have the pruning class here. I'll give you the date here in a moment. I have a feeling a lot of people, we got some great questions ahead of time of the class. I answered quite a few on the email this week, and almost every one of them had to do with pruning. And, you know, we can certainly answer some questions after class here in a moment, but just a couple of things to keep in mind. Yes, we would do a little bit of light pruning in the fall if we're removing dead wood, broken limbs, all that's easy. If I'm gonna take a whole branch out to a main trunk, do it anytime, I don't care. But if I'm going to shear something back or cut it back, I don't wanna do that here in the fall. I want these plants to harden off and protect those tip buds for spring, and I could go in this winter or prune after bloom is my big rule, going into spring next year after that plant flowers, if that makes sense. So I don't want to do a lot of hard pruning, but thinning out a little bit's okay here in the fall, and certainly deadheading some flowers. Hydrangea is always the #1 question. I think 5 people asked me about hydrangeas this week. What do I do when they're done blooming? You know, mine still has color. I'm not interested in cutting it back yet, but you've got those big dried or soon to be dried flowers, whether they're round or cone PG hydrangeas. Yes, before winter, I'm gonna go out and deadhead those down a bud or two to keep the weight. And again, I don't want broken, I don't want rain. I want that kind of tidied up a little bit, and then I'll wait till spring in March before I cut that hydrangea down hard to the ground or to where I want it to start off for the next growing season, okay? So hydrangeas might be an easy one to think of, but I would focus more on diseased, damaged wood, getting that out first, and then deadheading a little bit of flowers here in the coming weeks. And then maybe over the winter is when I really start to go in and look at structure, air circulation, all the things that we'll talk about here in the pruning class in November for winter time, okay? So there's quite a few you know, kind of topics to think about. Certainly not all the things you could do in the fall. We'll do some questions here in a minute, but just to mention a couple things with the class, just like all classes, we have a nice special going. If you want to come down, start shopping the day all the way through Friday, we put our compost on special. So this is our one of our best-selling products on the entire property. We go through 100 pallets a year of this. This is all the best compost on the market from EB Stone Planting Compost bags. But we also have the big compressed bales. For the class special, you can buy 3, get 1 free. So that's a great price to come down and maybe get a little stock of compost. I'll speak for me. I always got 5 bales of compost behind my house. I don't care what month of the year it is. I got some waiting back there to use for a project. So I will be taking some more home as well, even though I already have 5. So compost is on special. Just a couple quick notes on classes coming up. Next Saturday, I'll be talking about conifers. We'll be talking about colorful carnivorous creatures, I call them. That's a fun little tongue twister. But being in the evergreen state, that's kind of what that class is all about, rediscovering your evergreen state, looking at blues and yellows and different cultivars and a lot of dwarf, because conifers are a great way to add some interest to the winter garden. Pruning class, as I mentioned, is on November 7th, and we will be doing some pruning. I'll probably be standing here and cutting while I'm holding something. We'll figure out something to kind of show you some tips on pruning, and I'll probably have some slides for that as well. I've got some old, the good, the bad, and the ugly, we'll call it. We'll show you some how to prune and how not to prune. How's that? And then, like I mentioned, I'll be picking up a hellebore class. That'll be on Sunday the 8th. So we'll be talking about hellebores, Christmas roses, all the fun perennials that are hellebores, because there's some great varieties to choose from as well. So that's about it. I think I'll turn it over to Nicole here, and we'll take some questions.
Hi, we have lots of questions. So to start, the lighting is kind of hard for us to see the products. So can you grab the products and get them closer to the screen and maybe do just like a quick brief synopsis on what each one does? Because there's a lot of questions surrounding them, what they do, and we can't see the labels.
I'll start with the closest. So this is both by Monterey. This is our dormant spray mixture. We would have horticultural oil, which is OMRI or organic approved. This is liquid cop. So this kind of coats twigs and everything, cuts off oxygen. I get rid of eggs, I get rid of spores, I start clean. The liquid cop fights disease. I choose these two because nothing's worse than doing work twice. If other products I have to mix one in a sprayer, do it, and then go back and do this a second time, these two I can put right in the same spray mixture and take care of everything at once. I can also use them all through the growing season. These have no limit, except it's 90 degrees. How many days was it 90 degrees this year in Washington? Like 2. So don't spray mid-July to mid-September if you want to be safe. Rest of the year, I can use those 2 products. The herbicides that I talked about, we've got Weed Beater FE. So that is from Bonide. That's a natural lawn weed killer. I don't have chemical in there. That's just HDTA iron. So that takes care of the majority of lawn weeds. Not good with clover, not good with oxalis, but dandelion, spurge, everything else, this will take care of it. And all it does is turn my grass a darker green because of the iron. The grass can process iron, the weed cannot. So it's a great way to naturally do weeds. If I'm doing beds, gravel, try to get this without washout. This is Bonide Botanical Cleanup. This is a new formula from them. Citric acid, clove acid, all natural things in there that will burn weeds. If I have gravel, driveway, sidewalk, crack, this does it easy. If I'm in my planting beds, I just have to be careful not to get this on the foliage of other plants, or I'll do a little bit of burn to those as well. But again, no chemical. We talk slugs. There's your Sluggo brand. Iron phosphate comes in all kinds of forms and sizes. These are the pound shakers. This is original Sluggo, which is very effective. Like I mentioned, Sluggo Max is the new formulation. The only difference with this is it has a different attractant that's 3 times as strong. So this little can should do thousands of square feet versus the old one. That makes sense? We showed you the orange bag. This is infused. There you go. You can see the label, I think. That's infused by Bonide. That's my turf disease control if I want to keep down the turf problems over the winter. And then I had the 3 tools. So we talked about the root slayer. It's got that ergonomic round handle, and that's got the sharp little Conan weapon point. That stick out like a sore thumb in the store here. And then I think everybody's seen or heard about hula hoe. I've got that simple hood, that I can scrape along the soil surface, either short handle or long handle, and use that for manual weeding as well. Does that cover the products a little better?
Yeah. Oxalis, a lot of people are asking about that. What's the right product for that?
Well, I would have to get a little heavier chemical, to be honest. The problem with clover and oxalis is with the waxy leaves, hardly anything will stick to it. So if you get a surfactant like Turbo, we sell a product called Turbo. It's a spreader sticker. And if I buy something like Weed Beater Ultra, is a chemical lawn weed control that will take care of all the things the natural one will. But now if I use some Turbo with that, I'll stick it to the clover and get it out of there easy enough. In the garden beds, nothing would change, the same mixture, but I cannot get that herbicide on my perennials, my shrubs, those type of areas. I mean, for me, yes, I have tried the iron. I've tried different ways to spray. I'm a non-chemical guy on my own turf, so I hate to say it. I walk around here in the fall, especially, and coming out of winter, and if you can get it and pop it out of the ground with that taproot before it goes to seed, you're going to have 100 of them. If you get it here now before it blooms, you'll be done with it. I had a lot of it in a couple areas, and yes, I spent an hour or two last fall, this coming out this winter. I have had none of it come back in those spots. So it's one you can't eradicate, but if you walk away, it goes to seed, you're going to have a bazillion of them. That'll form a thick ground cover.
So just a quick interjection, because there are so many questions. If you have to leave for whatever reason, we are recording this and it will be posted up on our website, so you can go back through. Because there are such a large volume of questions, we're just going to kind of go from the top and go through down to the bottom. So if you have any other questions that pop up or we don't get to yours, please feel free to email us at sunnysidenursery@msn.com. But we're going to do our best to get through all of these, so bear with us. Trevor, buttercup in the lawn, you mentioned some pet-friendly products. Will those take care of it as well?
I hate to tell you, the buttercup is going to be a tough one. I have no doubt if I use that Weed Beater FE, it's listed for suppressing it, so you'll probably see it disappear. I have a feeling it'll come back a little bit over late winter, spring. You might have to get it again. I would try that if you don't want to go the chemical route. If I buy a different lawn herbicide, we have a couple different options here. It sounds really funny, but brush killer. We carry brush killer from Bonide, BK32 it's called. That will kill anything it touches, but it doesn't hurt grass. So if you're really careful using brush killer, you're red in the face and you want horsetail, buttercup, the really bad stuff, as well as blackberries on the bank, you want to nuke those guys. You would want to get that BK32, to be honest. It is chemical. There's nothing organic about it at all. But as long as I have a dry day, I spray it on there, keep my kids, my pets, all that off of the lawn for that one day while it dries on and does its thing. After that, it's got no soil residual, so I don't have issues long term. I wouldn't send my kids and my pets out when it was wet and I just sprayed.
And for clarification, we should not use Weed Beater in flower beds to get rid of clover. Is that correct?
No, Weed Beater. Well, again, I'm not saying you can't, but I would be real careful because, it's not going to kill grassy weeds at all. That's a selective lawn herbicide. If I want to try to get clover, grasses, weeds in my planting beds, if I don't want to manually pull things or use the hula hoe, I'm going to probably get that botanical cleanup that I showed, or a different non-selective herbicide. This will kill anything it touches or damage it. Some of that harder weeds I might have to get twice. If your clover's got a taproot 8 inches into the soil, you're probably going to get it once now, and then you're probably going to have to go back and repeat a spray here coming out of winter. But most of this stuff, when we're talking weeds and spraying, you get down there into that 45-degree neighborhood or so, you're done for the winter. So if you're going to do that part of it, that's what I would jump on as soon as you got a nice day here this weekend, next week. Get your spraying done, because once it dips down below 45, they're going a little bit dormant for the winter too, and you're not going to have as much death with the spray. You'll have to do it again.
Okay, shifting gears a little bit. Calla lilies in both the ground and in containers. What should we do?
Well, my question would be, is it white calla lily? So white, the species calla lily is usually hardy here. I have one in my garden. I've never had issues with it coming back for 18 years. It gets bigger every season. If it's white, you're probably just leaving it alone, to be honest with you. If you purchased a orange, pink, black spotted foliage, there's a lot of really cool callas out now that we add to containers or our garden for the season. There's no chance those will come back left in the ground in Western Washington, unless you're a very lucky gardener. I would plan on digging those bulbs, maybe not quite yet. You know, I'd say you probably got a month or so. Let it go naturally dormant. Once we get that first kind of light frost, then you pop those out of the ground or out of your container and store them in the garage to replant again next year. And you can find a lot of different ways to store them online, from newspaper to sawdust to vermiculite. It goes on and on. There's a lot of different ways to store them. If it's in the pot, you know, and you don't care about is nothing else in the pot, you could probably take that whole container and just put it in a protected area. You know, don't let it desiccate and dry out totally, but you also don't want to keep it sopping wet or you'll rot the bulb. So, you know, for me, behind the house, I got big eaves. Sometimes I can throw a pot like that underneath the eaves. It stays out of the weather a little bit more. Or, you know, to me, the easiest way, you know, with our winters in Washington, you know, who knows when we get frost and how long. And I don't think we're going to get a very cold winter. You know, to watch the weather. If you see, you know, temperatures coming, you know, mid-20s, low 20s, maybe teens at some point, take that pot and throw it in the garage for a few nights. You know, let it stay above freezing and then pop it back outside when it warms up a little bit.
Slugs, when do we battle them? Do we do it now? Do we do it in the spring? Do we all the time?
You've got slugs. I'm knocking on wood that you can't see here because I'm lucky I don't have a lot of slugs because I probably clean up too much of my leaves. But if you have slug issues, I would absolutely get a head start this fall. You know plants that they like. Everybody who gardens knows there's certain things they go for, other things they could care less about. If I have plants that are perhaps slug prone that I love, and there's a lot of them I have in my yard, I'm going to get the debris cleaned up in the fall, and I'm going to get those little guys protected with some of that iron phosphate. And I'm going to make sure I get out early spring. I'm not talking April or May. I'm talking like mid-March before they start to grow. And I'm going to get that sluggo around that crown one more time, because then as everything's waking up for 2021, I've got that shield already built up around that perennial. Says don't cross this line and start eating my coneflower again or whatever it is.
We've got some questions about hydrangeas, specifically, you know, a few different aspects of hydrangeas, but pruning, how far back? Do you do it now?
Hydrangeas, I don't know that I do now. I mean, if you want to deadhead some flowers, have at it. I would really not prune back hydrangeas hard until we get to the end of winter. You know, for me, my schedule in my yard is I wouldn't do anything here for probably a month, and maybe mid-November to Thanksgiving time when we're going dormant, fall color, all the leaves are dropping. Yes, I will walk out a deadhead mine at minimum, and I'm talking on hydrangea. We've got long stems. If you come to the pruning class, I'll have some stalks in here and show you how to do those. But if we had a long stem, we would go down below the flower, and maybe we cut down a bud or two, you know, to right above a pair of buds. That's where at this point I'd be like, all right, if I never got back to it, I'm cool with you starting out growing at that point for 2021. A lot of times with hydrangeas, my question would be, what type do you have and what variety is it? Because you've got to be a little careful with the shade mop head, the round flowered hydrangeas. A lot of the old-fashioned varieties bloom on old wood. And if I go out in the winter and I cut it from 4 feet down to 6, it will always grow 6 inches. It will always grow, but I may not get any flower next year if I've got an old wood bloomer. If you have new wood bloomers like I do now, you can do whatever you want to them and they always start over again. I think you've probably seen hydrangeas getting scalped, you know, pretty close to the ground coming out of winter, and up it comes and off we go again. I probably just don't have flowering till a little bit later in the summer, but they will always bloom that same year.
Shasta daisies, should those be cut at the end of fall or in spring?
You could honestly do either, but Shasta daisies would be like the stick perennial that I mentioned. I would leave a little bit of the crown out of the soil so you don't step on it. You know where it is come springtime. It's not that time yet, but whether you go out, later in November and kind of chop it back for the winter and be done, or you want to let it sit there until spring, just make sure you get it cleaned up in early March before it starts to grow again for 2021.
Can you use pine needles for mulch?
Yeah, that's funny. I don't know what it is with pine this year. We've had a couple people email about that too. I don't have any problem with any of that stuff for mulch. The issue, if I use something like needles or frankly very woody bark, is as I apply that on my soil, when it decomposes, it takes all the nitrogen out. So folks that go real heavy with a woody or needly mulch will tend to have plants that are kind of yellowish, lighter green, not quite as healthy looking. So if it was me and you do the pine, they're acidic, which very few things around here don't mind that. Don't put them on the vegetable garden, but anywhere else but that. My recommendation would be to get like roadie food, a good organic fertilizer, sprinkle that out on my soil surface, and then put that pine mulch or barky woody bark on top of that. And that way as it rots, it's taking the fertilizer from the pellets and not from the soil.
Wood stemmed heucheras. This person said that they dig them up and replant deeper. Is there a better way?
Nope, I do the same thing, to be honest with you. My heuchera schedule's probably 3 years for what she's talking about or he's talking about doing. I typically go through mine on a 3-year cycle. This year it's obsidian's year, to be honest with you. I got a lot of dark obsidian. Those will get dug up at some point late winter, and I'll divide them and pop them back in the ground. The issue with heuchera is honestly what we would call frost heave. It gets a little bit of a woody crown, and as it grows, it kind of pops out of the soil. Sometimes you might end up with a little 4 or 6 inch stalk with a tuft of foliage on top. Those can just be dug and replanted right down into the ground. It's not going to hurt the plant at all.
Some fruit tree questions. We've got coddling moth problems on a pear tree and scab on an apple. What should they do in the fall for both those?
Well, like I mentioned with the edibles especially, if you had an issue, whether it's maggot, moth, scab, peach leaf curl, whatever fruit or berry issue it is, number one is you've got to get all that stuff out of the system before winter. So leaves get raked up when they fall. I don't want any fruit laying on the ground or hanging in the tree. All that gets knocked out and thrown away in the yard waste. Get rid of all of it, and then I will go straight for that dormant spray. And we don't have to do it every week all winter, but pick some time. It could be December, January before bloom. We get that liquid cup and the hort oil, and we apply that as a spray. So we pop that right onto the tree. Now I start next year clean. The issue is wind and rain, and we get into March, my tree flowers, it looks great. I do everything I can do to take care of my tree, but my neighbor over here, Mrs. Jones, does not. So if she has scab, if she has maggot flies, codling moth, whatever it is, that is going to blow right back into my tree and infect me again. So if you really want to keep your fruit trees clean, I would get it cleaned up in the fall. I would spray it one time, December, January before flower. Now I'm clean. Now I wait for my tree to bloom come springtime. And after we have what's called petal drop, all those petals are off the tree. They're on the ground. The bees have done their pollinizing. I'm never going to spray a tree in bloom or I got no fruit, no matter what I use. So after flower drop, now I walk out and say, okay, if I get on a 1 month, like liquid cop for disease, hort oil for bug, if I spray that, maybe it's mid-March, mid-April, mid-May, I keep all that stuff away from getting back in my tree and I'm good to go over the summer.
On the note of edibles, is now a good time to move like baby strawberry plants?
Yep. Yeah, if you're talking strawberries in particular, I'm not sure how old your plants are, but always think of strawberries. You've got what we call mother plants. So if I've had my strawberries for like 3 or more years, I want to just remove those old mother plants and get rid of them. They're useless after 3 or 4 seasons at the most. I want the runners and the fresher plants. So if I remove those or pull them out, divide them and replant them, I can always get free starts. Last time I dug out my patch, I replaced what I had and probably had 100 more plants that I gave to neighbors and friends and family and said, here's some strawberries, because they'll multiply very easily. But that is a great project. Again, it doesn't need to be today. Mine are still got a few berries on them, to be honest with you. I would tend to do that probably towards the last part of winter to early spring would be my preferable time frame, but it could be done anytime over the dormant season.
An out of control lilac bush, lots of suckers. It's taking over. Not really sure where the main start is. Do you have suggestions?
Lilacs are a tough one to tell to behave, to be honest with you. That's a suckering type shrub, and there's a lot of them. I don't have an answer for you to get rid of suckering. I have old lilacs in my yard. I love them. I love the scent, the flower. Mine are 20 feet tall. They're old trees, and I'm cool with walking around a couple of times in the summer and cutting. I'll usually try to dig out where I've got a sucker coming out and try to get down into the soil and sever that root system. Yes, another one will come back probably the next year, but that's just kind of how lilac grows. If you are going to clean it up, I got rid of all the mess at the base of mine. I wanted, I think mine are 5 or 7 trunk, and they're big. I mean, mine are 6 to 8 inch trunks. I wanted a big tree. I didn't want this little pruned into a ball. If you prune it down like this, you're just going to make your mess at the base even more. It's probably your personal taste. It sounds like the question's kind of like me. I'd rather have it tidy, have gardens around the base of it, have it up over as a taller specimen. Then yes, go dive in there at some point this winter, remove all those suckers. Be honest with you, if you got friends that want lilacs, take a shovel like that root slayer and dig up a clump of that. If I have a little shoot, it's always going to have roots attached to it. You got to transplant. You can go plant somewhere else. They're easy to move around as well.
What do you consider to be a hard frost?
Well, you know, first frost, sometimes a little weak. You know, I walk out and I see the truck windshield with some frost on or the turf, but it's not really that cold. It barely dipped below. I would say a good hard frost, you're going to see when you walk out in the morning, you're going to see things kind of hanging down. You know, I'm going to see foliage that droops. I'm going to see some ice on some of the leaves, and you're probably immediately 2 days later going to see all the perennials go brown, yellow, and pretty much go dormant immediately. I wish I could rub my crystal gardening ball and tell you what date that's going to happen this year, but typically around our area, I would guess mid-ish November. You know, you probably got a month or so, but who knows what the weather is going to do. We're always such an interesting part of the country for that.
Can you talk a little bit about storing things in a greenhouse, in your garages, putting blankets or, you know, covers over your garden beds, things like that?
Well, you can get frost cloth, you know, if you want to protect a tender specimen that's in the ground. You know, probably keep your vegetable garden extended a few more weeks with light frost cloth. If you've got a greenhouse, you're lucky. I mean, you could bring anything you want into the greenhouse in the winter if it's heated and keep it going. I would be real cautious. To me, the issue with greenhouse is bug. You know, I go from inside to outside, outside to inside. The first thing I'm going to do is look at bugs. You know, what did I get over the winter in my greenhouse? It's always going to come. Whitefly, scale, aphids. If you've got a warm environment, the bugs will find it. And it's easy things to treat for, but think of that before you're moving, especially into the house. You know, we have a lot of folks that want to bring a cool, you know, tropical-ish plant and enjoy it as a house plant in the winter. That's awesome. You know, it's easy to do, but I'm going to probably put that in my garage here immediately. We're starting to get cold at night, cold enough for those. And I'm going to really look it over for bugs. I might even spray it once before I bring it in my house, and I'm going to keep a little close eye on it over the winter. People do that with citrus, you know, around here, mandevillas, you know, we could go on and on, hibiscus trees. There's a lot of things. If you've got a specific one, email us, but, watch the temperature. There's some things that can handle, citrus can go down right to freezing. It's not that it won't take frost, but if I had, say, a tropical type hibiscus or awesome here in the summer, that can't handle much below 45 degrees. So if I have something like that, I'm looking at getting that in now and not waiting until we get a little bit closer to frost.
So are there things you can dig up out of the garden and say put in a container in order to get them, like begonias, in order to get them in the garage?
Well, it's either dig them in and put them in a container, or honestly just bare root them. I mean, begonias, all those things that grow from tubes or bulbs, very easy to store, on the garage or the shelf in the garage. I used to just throw stuff on there. Some people have, cold basements, a room. You just don't want it too warm. I don't want room temperature. So if your garage is not heated, maybe you've got a cold shed, that doesn't quite get as cold as outside. I mean, there's a lot of options. You just don't want it to be too cold.
Okay. How do you combat mushrooms in your lawn?
Mushrooms. It's a sign that you've got healthy soil. Don't let mushrooms freak you out. It's a sign that you've got good, healthy soil. If there's mushrooms coming up, and you probably have an old root system, stump, something woody down there in the soil that you may not know about, but it was there years ago, and then we get the mushrooms. In the lawn, we carry a product called Consan 20. It's CONSAN 20. We have bottles of it in the store there. That's a great lawn application. That's a good disinfectant for mushroom, bacteria, algae. I mean, the list goes on and on, but it's one that you would have the best luck with against mushrooms and turf.
Excellent. Hellebores. Leaves are ugly and brown. Should you cut them back to the ground now?
Yeah, if you've got old foliage on hellebores, I'd almost want to see a sample of it. Maybe you've got a little bit of hellebore blight that we might want to spray for. If there's black on there, especially on the stem, I'd really think about getting a spray on those here in the fall to keep that controlled, and then watch the leaves as they come out again after blooming spring, and maybe treat it one more time. If they're just getting brown, maybe you've never cut it back, and leaves, even though things say evergreen or not green for all eternity, a plant will hold its good foliage usually for a season. Other plants maybe 2 or 3, but they'll always drop at some point. I would cut all that old leaves off. If it's brown now, get rid of it. If you've got some green still, I might leave the green alone here for a few more weeks. And then, like I mentioned earlier, I get to Christmas time, that's hellebore time. I got a lot of hellebores in my own yard, and I will always walk outside, hopefully on a not so wet day, right after Christmas, New Year's, and I will take all the leaves off every one of mine. I want to start over again, get rid of the bugs that might be underneath the foliage, but I want to see the flower. If I've got rid of all that old foliage, now I can really see those beautiful flowers as they come out of the crown starting at Christmas, and enjoy the flowers all spring.
If it is diseased, what do you recommend taking care of that?
You can use the copper would be a pretty effective fungicide if you have a copper fungicide like the liquid cop. If you were going to buy something specific for hellebores, I would get a spray we have here called Funginil. That's Fungonil, Funginil, and that's made by Bonide. It used to be called Old Daconil. It was a great all-purpose spray. You can use it. It's a chemical, but it's non-systemic, so you can use it in your vegetable garden, tomatoes, a lot of other areas as well. But it's, I think, probably the best one against the hellebore blight.
How do you take care of moss right now on your lawn?
Moss, if you haven't treated, do it here pretty quick because you can still get it. But we would get 2 choices. We have bags of iron sulfate, ferrous iron sulfate. That's called Moss Max. You would put that in the spreader, put that over the whole turf area, and you would see that turn black within a day or 2, and you can rake it out and you're done. If it's in, be real careful with the iron. If you leave those pellets, that's a solid application. If I leave those little pellets on my driveway, my lawn, or my sidewalk, my deck, it will stain orange because it's got iron like rust. So be real careful on hard surfaces with that. The other option is We have another spray. It's also called Moss Max, but it's a liquid. That's a potassium soap. So if I have not a huge area, my roof, up in trees in the winter, if you want to get moss out of trees, that's you can use it in the dormant season for that. In my flower beds, the potassium soap would be the natural option that I wouldn't have to worry about staining.
Switching gears a little bit, there's a lot of questions about voles. And how do you take care of those even through the winter and in a humane way?
Well, we're not into the death trap MAME, so I won't even get into that. But voles, you know, we've had a family place in Cleveland for years, and I really fight them over there. I don't fight them, luckily, knock on wood, at my place in Everett. But they'll eat the root system down. I've had old trees, 20 years old, like, why isn't that growing this spring? And it's gone. I mean, they've eaten every root system on the whole thing. I would try a repellent always first. You know, if I'm a vole, you can't remove the food source like a mole perhaps, because the vole's looking for roots to feed on in the winter. So you can't dig up all your yard and replant it every year. That's unfeasible. But I would try to repel him, apologize to the neighbors, and send him next door if you can. So if you get, we carry an encapsulated castor oil product called Mole Max, and that does voles, moles, armadillo. If you have an armadillo up here, I doubt that one, but it does just about anything for bigger animals. And if I apply that down on my lawn or my flower beds, I will have him move next door. The mistake gardeners make with Mole Max is they buy a bag and they cover their whole yard. Do not go home and cover your whole yard. That's the mistake. I want to find out where he is in the lawn or the bed active, and I want to do like 1/3 of my property, okay? I'm going to wait a week or two, and then I'm going to go to another third, and then I'm going to wait that next week or two, and now I'm going to go to the fence and hopefully wave goodbye and have the neighbor deal with them next year.
When do you want to spray for rust on your fruit trees, and then specifically on a flowering currant?
Again, if I had it this year, get a dormant spray down with the liquid copper and the horde oil at some time over the winter. Not today, probably not even next month, but December or January, I want to get that sprayed once. Then in the case of the fruit tree, like we talked about, I'm going to let it flower, and then I'm going to immediately after petal drop get on a once a month schedule through the wet season to keep it away. The currant is not going to really fruit unless you've got fruiting currant, but it's going to be a spectacular flower for the hummingbirds coming out of winter. So I want to get that dormant sprayed, let it bud out, do all of its shiny flower thing in March, and then immediately after bloom, same thing, get that spray down there again.
What about when's the best time to apply neem oil for lace bugs?
Lace bugs. You know, the fall's a great time to get one application of oil on because the lace bugs have been taking over rhodea and azalea here the last few years. So what I'm reading for recommendation is a fall cleanup again, leaves that drop out. I want to apply one oil spray here going into winter. And then again, I walk away, and come springtime, you know, probably more like late March, early April, as long as my plant is not in flower, do not spray in bloom, but before flower or after flower, I would get it again and try to break the cycle. There's quite a few things. The oil is a great way to kind of get rid of what might be on there still. I would recommend in spring, you get a different type product like spinosad. You can look on the American Rhododendron Society website. They'll give you a couple good natural type chemicals that will take care of lace bug that I would apply in the growing season. So as those larvae are hatching or she's flying around and laying more eggs, I can attack it that way as well.
Is now an okay time to transplant things to move them, specifically peonies we're asked about?
You know, I'm going to be honest, I'm not quite there yet. I doubt it's the end of the world if you do it now, today, next week. I've always stuck by the general rule. I'm not moving anything until it's dormant. So I think you've still got, you know, 2, 3, maybe 4 weeks here until things have gone dormant, and then do whatever you like all winter long up till probably early March. But if you want to play it 100% safe, unless it's something that's gone dormant already, I would wait just a couple more weeks.
Shifting gears, rhubarb, what do you do with them now?
Well, rhubarb, you know, I don't know, probably not harvest anything anymore, but until it kind of melts, you know, rhubarb will kind of turn like the hosta, a little bit like snot here in the winter time. If you wait till it goes dormant, and then go ahead and, you know, get it cleaned up, maybe you mulch it. I wouldn't worry about feeding it here going into winter. We would do that coming out of winter, but maybe a little bit of compost around to protect the crown a bit. And then springtime would be more, okay, let's get you started over again, get some food down, maybe spread the compost out a little bit, and then off we go for another season.
Oyster shells for lime in the garden. They're using them around lettuce and radishes for slug control right now. Does that continue on through the fall as slug control?
That's fine. Yeah, I mean, if you know, a lot of people buy diatomaceous earth, which is what that is, just crushed up seashells. That feels kind of soft and powdery to our hands, but it's like razor blade to Mr. Slug or Snail. That's a great natural way to go to keep it through the winter. And, you know, as those shells, I'm not sure if they're putting whole shells or if they're using crushed, but if they're crushed, that just activates a little quicker, and that would also add some calcium, you know, or raise the pH like we talked about with lime. Same idea with the calcium.
You talked about cover crop seeds. Can you show us again which one you specifically suggested? And then somebody's asking for a suggestion for under a large fruitless mulberry that stays shaded.
Well, most of this stuff will grow, especially without the foliage. This is all about fall, winter cover crop. So I wouldn't hesitate by putting any of them underneath that mulberry for the winter. You could pick your choice. Whenever I've done it, I've always kind of went the way of the crimson clover. You can see the package there in the raised bed look with the little nice red flowers here. You'll find buckwheat. There's different types of peas. Anything you see that's listed as cover crop is going to do a great job. You know, there'll be some different options.
Can you talk about, you mentioned composting. Somebody asked, you know, around hostas and flowers. Are you putting this in the area where they are meant to keep roots warmer? How much do you put down?
Well, for, you know, speaking of my own garden, I tend to, when I clean up my perennials for fall, and I'm not quite there yet, I still got flowers all over, I will get things down pretty close to the ground, and I tend to put probably 2 or 3 inches of compost. I might cover the whole entire crown for the winter. The rain goes right through, but I've kind of got it protected if we do get cold. It's just come springtime, it allows me to kind of rake that compost out maybe a foot away from the plant, apply my rim of fertilizer right around the crown, then I can cover that right back up with that compost and off to go for a season. I don't have to do it twice that way. You certainly could, more compost the better, but I wouldn't rush to do a lot of that yet. I kind of ran out last night and looked again this morning at my own yard, a lot of perennials. Yes, there's some things that are going to seed and look tired. I'm going to leave some seeds for the birds here for a while. I'm not going to run home today or tomorrow and cut everything back. I would say you got a few weeks here. You know, let that plant tell you when it's ready to go to bed. You know, to be honest, you're going to look out and go, wow, that really went brown, yellow, and it's kind of melted to the ground here. Go ahead and clean it up. You know, until then, I'd let it sit here and store some energy for the next season still.
How far do you prune back climbers? And if you prune back a rose a little too hard, will it still be okay next year?
Yeah, I mean, roses are resilient creatures. I'd be surprised if you could cut it. I've seen people, I mean, my shrub rose is probably, the one on my bank's probably 6 feet across right now and 3 feet tall. If you came by in February, you would go, what did you do to that thing? It's probably 6 inches tall and 1 foot across. And then off we go again for another year. Roses are pretty easy. Climbers is a tough one because I would want to know what you have. Some old climbing roses only bloom on old wood. If you cut it back hard, you get no flower. And let's face it, we want rose because I want flower is the #1 reason. But, you know, climbing rose is meant to go up. You know, if you're trying to cover something, and you get it up over an arbor or up a trellis or whatever your situation is, there's no reason to cut it way back hard and wait for 2 more years to grow like the way it was before. I would simply remove the foliage, get rid of rose hips if you have them at some point before next spring, and tidy up the structure to what you want to cover it right back up.
Sorry, circling back to this cover crop, what happens once you plant this? How do you get rid of it in order to plant again, or can you just plant on top?
You know, as long as you turn it over down into the soil like a foot, whether you rototill or you take a digging fork and turn your soil over come springtime, that's when you get the benefit of the nitrogen fixing and of the foliage and stuff turning into fertilizer for you as you go through the season. Yes, I'm protecting my soil surface from getting hit by winter, pounded, depleted, all that. But if I turn that over, I'm adding nutrients into the soil that I'll get the benefit of for the whole growing season. If you want to go along and weed it, that's certainly fine too, you know, if you want to do it that way. But I just don't, you protected your soil, but I haven't added that organic mixture back in there to turn into fertilizer for the garden.
Okay. Do you have any concerns about heavily pruning back Portuguese laurel in midwinter, like December?
Yeah, I would never, ever prune anything evergreen. You know, this goes back probably 6 weeks ago. When we do the pruning class here, I'll talk specifically about that. But if it's got evergreen foliage, we do not prune September, October, November, all the way through the winter. And you could do that right at the end of winter. So if you're talking to me about laurel, whether it's Portuguese, English, or whatever, I would be walking out there in spring, like maybe mid-March, 1st to April, do whatever you want to do at that point, and off we go again. If you cut, you know, a laurel back too hard, it may not come back so swell. Be real careful not to just leave bare wood. A third is usually my rule. If I can go back a third, let it grow back out this year, then maybe next year I go down another third if you got to do it over 2 seasons. But we're not going to take a, you know, 20-foot laurel and cut it down to 4 foot. It's probably not going to turn out so swell. Although people who know laurel, as I smile, it probably will come back.
When's the best time to treat for root weevils?
Root weevils will go to bed here for the winter. So if you've been fighting root weevils, we want to walk out there in springtime. You know, again, I don't know what the weather is going to do, but in my experience, root weevils probably wouldn't be doing a whole lot in the soil until about mid-April. So if I get a product like we have a product called 8, just like the number 8 written out, but you have to get the granular one. It comes in a shaker jug. It's got bifenthrin is the active ingredient. That's a superior root weevil control. It used to be stuck with, you know, murder, death, kill, systemic, and who wants to use that anymore? This was something I could just sprinkle underneath my rhododendron, my whatever it is you're getting root weevil issues with, and that will go in through the soil structure and eliminate the larvae, which means I get no adults and nobody crawling up at night to feed. They're impossible to spray, to be honest, because they're down in the soil. When you're up, unless you go out with a flashlight, which I've done a couple times, they're kind of cool little bugs, but if you go out and find them at 2 o'clock in the morning, you can find them crawling up through the laurel, the rhododendron, whatever the broadleaf is, and you can see them eating those little notches. But if you go out during the day, you're never going to be able to spray them. We got to get something that gets the soil.
Okay. How do you fight powdery mildew?
Well, there's a lot of different ways with mildew, but, you know, that's the poster child. You know, if I go, not to, you know, I love roses. I'm not trying to talk you out of roses, but let's just take the rose. If I don't do anything about powdery mildew in our Western Washington climate, let's be brutally honest, you're going to get powdery mildew on your rose. I mean, that just is what it is. If I let it get on there for the year, yeah, I'm going to have a tougher time getting rid of it. If you know you have mildew or a different plant like deciduous azalea, I love deciduous azaleas, and I got a great orange one I'd never get rid of, but if I didn't do anything about it, it would get mildew every single summer with our weather patterns. So knowing that, knowing I want the plant, I will be proactive and get out there and get it sprayed before I get it. So if I go out, you know, again, late February, early March, as my rose is waking up, and I get those leaves sprayed or use a root product, whatever your preference is, and I keep it away, I'm going to be good for the season. If I walk away and come back in June and I got mildew on the whole thing, it's going to be a lot tougher to get rid of. So to answer your question directly, if I'm trying to fight powdery mildew and I want to stay on the natural side, I'm going for neem oil, or copper is a very good natural fungicide for that as well. If I don't mind maybe using a little bit of the murder, death, kill side, and I've red in the face with my rose, there's some root pour options like rose drench and other things that I can fight that from the inside out. So if I go out in late February and I apply my rose drench, and I do that every 4 or 6 weeks through the wet weather in the spring, I won't have bugs or disease.
A shrub rose that's done flowering, obviously, but should you just put it in the ground now or put it in a container for the winter?
No, I would. If you're choosing between, you know, smiling as a gardener, I don't have any plants behind my house in pots right now. It might be the first time in 20 years. But if you have a choice of putting it in the ground or storing a container, I would always get it in the ground. That's a great insulator for winter. You've got zero chance of losing it. If I leave a plant out in a pot, speaking for me with the big eaves at my place, and I let it dry and I get cold, now we got issues and you'll be losing some things over winter. So to answer that directly, yes, if you've got a spot you know that's going, get it in the ground, let it start getting some roots on. It's a great time of year to plant, and then you're that much ahead for the coming season.
Will cleanup hit Bermuda grass in your lawn?
Cleanup would hit Bermuda grass as well as any other kind of grass. So just be real careful if you're going to spot spray for that or Poa annua or whatever the issue is. I smile because I'm the same way with the OCD lawn. If you spray that, it's going to kill whatever it touches, and then we would have to cut that dead patch out and oversee those areas with our desired grass.
Do you have suggestions on how to get rid of poison oak or poison ivy?
Well, again, we mentioned earlier kind of the high-end herbicide, the brush killer. You've got to get a heavy brush killer. We carry a brush killer from Bonide called BK32. You might find Crossbow. There's a zillion brand names, but it has to be labeled as brush killer. And the labels are very specific now. You'll see right on there, don't always read the label before you buy something or spray with it. And if I look at that label, it's going to say the heavy hitters on there: blackberry, bamboo, poison ivy, kudzu. You know, there's 6 or 7 things that are tough to kill. That's going to be brush killer territory.
Do you have suggestions about getting rid of comfrey?
That?
Comfrey, getting rid of that?
Uh-oh. Oh,
There you
comfrey.
go.
Okay.
Comfrey, yeah.
Same idea. You know, if you've let comfrey go to seed, because most of this stuff will go to seed if you don't, or you got too much of it, any of that stuff will nuke comfrey. I don't know that you have to go to brush killer. I bet you the botanical, the cleanup botanical, or sometimes a little mild, you know, home kind of remedy with vinegar and such might get that. But I don't think you'd have to go to the brush killer to get the comfrey.
Potted succulents, what's the best way to keep these protected in the winter temperatures?
Well, when you say succulent, you know, hardy succulents that we sell outside here are good down 30, 40 below zero. I would never, ever worry about death in the winter. I've got them all over my rockery and use them in pots. If you're talking about echeveria, aloes, some things that you might have had outside in the summertime that belong in the house, those need to come in immediately. We're getting cold enough at night. Those have to be brought inside to a sunny window, enjoyed over the winter. Then you can pop those back outside. It doesn't change the fact that it's dormant. Any of them, you don't want to keep those too much on the wet side. So even if you had a container of succulents and you wanted to make sure it was okay, if it's got great drainage, you're probably fine leaving it out in the rain. If you wanted to ensure that it didn't get too wet in the winter, maybe you tuck it up underneath the eave for the winter and maybe water it like once or twice a month when it's dormant here, and keep it on the dry side and then pop it back out into the regular spot here come spring.
Hardy hibiscus, how do you care for them over the winter? Do they do okay in pots?
Yeah, I'm not sure if you mean the perennial ones or if you're talking like woody rose of Sharon, but either one can be left outside in the garden. The issue with perennial hibiscus is heat. So that would be a plant. I don't have one of those in my yard at this point, but if I did, that would be a plant I would for sure put a marker stake next to or something to remind myself it was there, because you're going to probably see, you know, coneflower, black-eyed Susan, on and on, all these perennials come up in the typical spring weather. That one may not come out of the ground for another month. So I don't want you to forget that it's there, because it needs a little bit more warmth to get going. If it's in a container, I don't think we get cold enough that we would damage it in the pot as long as it was a nice sized container. But again, I might just tuck that container up towards the house for the winter, water it very infrequently. Or if you're maybe a little bit colder in climate than we are, maybe that pot comes into a cold garage for that cold 3-4 nights in a row, and we got down there low 20s, high teens.
Sky pencil and or regular holly is dropping yellow leaves, and it's all around a little yellow. Should you put down some iron supplement to help?
Iron will always help green, but I bet you if it's dropping yellow, it's not iron, it's probably more nitrogen. And make sure you look at the bottom of the foliage and we don't have any bug issues on there. Sometimes if you see kind of a blackish residue on some of those older leaves as they fall, you've got sooty mold, which means I had aphid, something eating on those guys over the winter. Sometimes hollies are a little bit prone to that. If it's just a few leaves, again, it's an evergreen, quote unquote, but I'm only going to hold my foliage for 3 years. So typically late summer, I would expect some older leaves to drop out here and there. If it's a whole bunch, or it sounds like the question is my plant is off color entirely, well, let's get some food on it. I wouldn't hesitate to maybe throw a little food on it now and for sure get that little guy fed coming out of winter.
What's the best way to treat aphids? Do you have a product suggestion specifically on edibles?
Yeah, I don't do, you know, again, I'm just being honest, I'm a non-chemical guy myself, so I'm going to stick with natural or organic type solutions. Aphids is, you know, they're gross and they're everywhere and probably everybody thinks they're the plague. It's an easy one to take care of. I mean, as long as you repeat spray, you know, with something natural, like today, I go back and get it again in 7-10 days and maybe a third time, you will get rid of the problem. You'll get the aphids, their eggs, and the future generations. I would, you know, if you've got some on some plants, let's get treated now before fall. And then again, watch for those things, same things coming out of winter. Use insecticidal soap. We get super insecticidal soap, neem oil, bond neem, you know, the list of options for something very safe, especially in the edible situation. You've got a lot of options.
We have some questions about grasses, specifically Japanese forest grass. What should you do to prepare it for winter?
Well, you know, again, I got a lot. I'm going to sit down here.
Yeah.
I've got a lot of forest grass in my own landscape. It still looks yellow. It looks great. I anticipate some great red fall color on it coming up. So no, I'm not doing this today, but forest grass will disappear for the winter. It truly does go dormant. There's no structure left. If you have patches of it, you know, probably a month or 6 weeks from now, you know, let it go, you know, melt to the ground and rake it out if you want. Sometimes those have a little bit of a stiff, kind of wiry stem above the soil. You know, besides running around for an hour and pruning those, if you're a little OCD like I am, sometimes I'll just grab my hedge clippers, lay them on the ground, and literally just kind of cut those little stalks back to the soil level, and I'm done. You know, yes, some years, if they're up a little bit, maybe I'll throw a little dose of compost on them for winter. But you don't have to do a whole lot with the hacking clover or the forest grass, except just remove the old last year's growth and then watch for them in the spring. Up they come again.
How do you get rid of liverwort?
Oh, man. All right. This is the point of the class where you stump the instructor. I really wish I had an answer for you. I get it in my yard, you know, in shade and wet, and honestly, I go straight for the hula hoe, and I try to scrape it off before it has a chance to spore. and I mulch that area with compost. Yes, it's not a long-term solution, but I'm going to be honest, I have not found a spray that does liverwort, to be brutally honest. I'm trying, and I'll try a couple more things probably coming out of winter to see, but that's a tough one. It really is a tough one.
Okay, we're going to take 3 more questions, okay? So we're almost there. Somebody said that they have 10-10-10 fertilizer hanging around. Are there, broad generalization of things that they can use that on?
You could probably use it on just about anything, but I'm guessing if it's 10-10-10, it's synthetic. Not a lot of plants are feeding up right now. Everything's going to bed for the winter. And being synthetic, the rain in the wintertime is going to flush that through the soil. It's not going to last very long. So I'll be honest, if it was me, I would get rid of the itch and leave that bag in the garage, and come springtime, I'd take it out there and go ahead and broadcast that around perennials. It wouldn't be a bad rose food. Don't use it on your lawn. Lawn just needs nitrogen. It won't need the balanced one, but you could probably put it on just about anything come spring. But if it was me, I'd leave it alone for the winter. I think it's not going to do you a whole lot of good during the dormant season.
Is there a difference between voles and moles, and how do you determine what it is that you have?
Well, moles are much larger. Voles are a little smaller. So besides catching them with the pitchfork and examining them and dissecting them, we're not going to do that. Moles, to me, tend to be more in the turf area. Not to say they can't be in the beds, but typically around here, moles will be in your turf. The voles will typically be in your shrub areas, underneath trees, beds. Because again, the mole's looking for grub, for worm, for something like that to eat. The vole typically is going to feed on roots in the dormant season, so underneath woody shrubs, places like that. It doesn't, whichever one it is, that same mole mats is what it's called. But if you look at that picture, again, I chuckle because it's got armadillo and all kinds of funky animals on there, but it will repel both of those creatures. Whether you put it in your bed or the turf area, it's not going to hurt anything. It's not going to kill the mole. When you get red the face, and to that point you can examine other options, but we're looking to just repel him to the neighbors first at that point.
Last question of the day. Is there any kind of book or literature that you recommend on different kinds of weeds and how to get rid of them, since there are so many? There's some great resources online. I think if you went, I'm pretty sure Hort Sense through Washington State's got a pretty good weed page. But if you literally just got on Google and typed in Pacific Northwest weed control, you're going to have multiple options. For me, when I'm playing around at home or in my office here looking at options, or will this do this, I tend to probably gravitate towards the university type information, whether it's Wazoo, Oregon State would be the other major ag school here in the Northwest. Both those would have great publications out. But your county, especially when we get towards the noxious weed discussion and things we are trying to eradicate from our environment, Snohomish County, King County, any of our local counties will have a pretty substantial weed control page as well. Excellent. We covered a lot of ground today. We appreciate everyone staying over late in order to get all these questions, and we hope that all of your questions were answered. Again, if they weren't, feel free to shoot us an email, sunnysidenursery@msn.com. We'd be happy to start up a personal conversation with you. And we hope to see you around the nursery. Take advantage of that compost discount this week. And then our Evergreen class is next Saturday, so we hope to see you then. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you very much, everybody.